Some debts aren't written on receipts. They live quietly, in kindness, in memory, in the strangers who changed our story without ever meaning to. He thought he was just helping a tired woman through a hard night, but years later, that woman walked back into his life, and the truth she carried changed everything. If this story touches your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Between Raindrop Stories, where every small act of kindness becomes a story that finds its way home again. Now, let's begin. The rain that night didn't just fall. It poured. A relentless cold curtain that turned the city streets into mirrors of neon and regret. Cars hissed past puddles, umbrellas buckled in the wind, and tucked away between a laundromat and a closed bookstore stood a tiny diner with a flickering red sign that simply read, Louis. Inside, the air smelled of black coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint nostalgia of something lost. A radio hummed softly from behind the counter, an old song about love and second chances that no one was listening to. Evan Ross, 26, leaned against the counter, running a damp cloth over the same spot for the 5th time. His apron was wrinkled, his hair damp from running through the rain earlier, and his hands, though calloused from years of work, still moved with gentle care. He was the kind of person you didn't notice right away, but once you did, you remembered him because there was something disarmingly good in the way he smiled at strangers. He wasn't supposed to be here tonight. Friday nights were for his guitar, the one he used to play in open mics before bills and rent took center stage. But his coworker, Brian, had texted 2 hours earlier. Sick. Can you cover? Evan didn't even think twice. He needed the extra shift. And besides, there was something comforting about Louis, about serving others when he didn't know how to serve himself. At 9:46 p.m., the bell above the door jingled, and a gust of cold rain swept in a woman who looked like she'd walked out of the wrong world. Her hair clung to her face, her expensive coat was soaked through, and her heels clicked softly against the tiled floor as she paused, like she wasn't sure she belonged here. Evan looked up from behind the counter, and for just a moment, their eyes met. His warm, hers tired and distant. He grabbed a towel and motioned toward a booth by the window. Sit down before the rain catches up, he said with an easy grin. I'll grab you something warm. She hesitated. I didn't even look at the menu yet. Then I'll surprise you, he said. You look like someone who could use soup in silence. Something in the way he said it, kind, not pitying, made her exhale for the first time that night. She sat down, and for a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The rain took care of the conversation. Evan moved through the small kitchen with practiced rhythm. He poured tomato soup into a bowl, added a slice of bread from the toaster, and poured coffee into the chipped white mug at always poured second chances. When he brought the tray to her table, she was staring out the window, her reflection blurred with the rain, the city lights painting her face in gold and blue. Here we go, he said softly, setting it down. Soup's hot, coffee's stronger than it looks, just like life. That earned the faintest smile, the kind that trembles before it trusts itself to stay. She picked up the spoon. You always talk in riddles? Only when I'm trying to sound wiser than I am, he said, grinning. She took a small sip, and in that moment, the entire diner felt warmer. The rain softened against the glass. Even the radio seemed to turn down, as if the world itself wanted to give her space to breathe. For a few minutes, Evan noticed her glancing toward her purse. Then her face fell slightly. You okay? He asked gently. She looked up, cheeks flushed. Actually, no. I think I left my wallet at the office. I can... Don't worry about it, he interrupted, easily. This one's on the house. Her brows furrowed. No, really. I'll come back tomorrow. I can pay double. He shook his head. You're not the first person who's had a rough night, and you won't be the last. Let me do this one thing right today. Her lips parted slightly. Why? He smiled. Because I've been on your side of the table before, and someone once did the same for me. She blinked, not because of his words, but because of the tone behind them. The kind of quiet sincerity that doesn't ask for anything back. For a while, she just looked at him, the man who didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but somehow saw her anyway. Thank you, she whispered finally. He shrugged. Soup's best when it's shared with peace of mind. When she finished, she sat quietly, hands clasped around the mug, like she was holding on to warmth she didn't want to lose. Do you ever feel, she said softly, like life keeps asking for more than you have left to give? Evan leaned against the booth across from her, thinking. All the time, he said honestly. But then someone shows up. even for a minute, and it's enough to keep going." She nodded, eyes glistening. Then, as if catching herself being too open, she laughed it off. "Sorry, you didn't sign up to be my therapist." He smiled. "Nah, the pay's terrible, but the view's decent." For the first time, she laughed, a real one this time. When she stood to leave, the rain had softened into a mist. She hesitated for a moment at the counter, then tore a small page from her notebook and began to write. He didn't ask what it was. He just watched her write, watched the way her hands trembled slightly, as though each word carried something she'd been holding too long. She folded the paper, placed it under the coffee mug, and gave him one last look, a look that felt like both gratitude and goodbye. Then she was gone. Evan found the note 5 minutes later. The ink had smudged slightly where a tear had fallen. It read, "You reminded me tonight that there's still goodness in the world. I was on my way to make a decision I couldn't undo. But your kindness stopped me, without even knowing it. Thank you, L." He stood there for a long time, the world outside still dripping and gray, the hum of the diner suddenly louder than before. He didn't know who L was, didn't know what she meant by a decision I couldn't undo. But that night, when he finally closed up, he slipped a note into his wallet, right behind an old photo of his mom, the one person who taught him that small kindnesses often save lives in ways we never see. Over the next few days, Evan found himself glancing toward the door whenever the bell chimed. Part of him, the foolish, hopeful part, kept expecting her to walk back in, dripping, rain, ready to pay him back. But she never did. Weeks turned into months. The note yellowed at the edges. And eventually, the memory of that night became like the rain itself, something that came and went, but always left the world a little cleaner when it was over. He didn't know it yet, but that small act, that one meal, had just rewritten the story of his life. Because one day, years later, the bell above the door would ring again, and she'd be standing there. This time not lost, not broken, but with something in her eyes he'd never forgotten.
3 years had passed since that rainy night at Louie's diner. The world outside had changed. Buildings grew taller, faces turned busier, and somewhere between rent payments and overtime shifts, Evan Ross had grown quieter. He still worked at Louie's. Same table by the window, same coffee stains that never came out. The regulars knew him by name now, the waiter with the easy smile. But even smiles have weight when you're wearing too long. Some nights after closing, he'd sit by that same window and look at the rain falling down the glass. He never said it out loud, but every drop reminded him of her, of Elle, the woman with tired eyes and the note that changed something inside him. He still carried that note in his wallet, faded, creased, and worn, but never forgotten. The bell above the door jingled softly that Thursday evening. Evan didn't look up right away. He was busy wiping down the counter. The dinner rush had just ended. Outside, the streets were slick with fresh rain, a familiar sound, steady and comforting. "Table for one?" he called out without turning around. A soft voice answered, "Only if you're serving." Something about the voice made him pause. It was calm, measured, but carried a warmth and hadn't heard in years. He turned and froze. There she was. Not in a soaked business coat this time, but in a light gray blazer, her hair tied neatly, her posture confident. She looked older, or maybe just stronger. But her eyes, those same gray-green eyes that had once looked like storm clouds, were now clear, steady, and bright. For a second, neither of them spoke. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Then she smiled softly. "Hi, Evan." He blinked, heart thudding. You remember my name?" She smile deepened. "You wore a name tag, but yes, I remember." He let out a shaky laugh. "Right, yes, that helps." Then, still staring, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." She admitted, "I wasn't sure I'd ever come back, but I promised myself if I ever did, this would be the first stop." He poured her a cup of coffee automatically, hand steady out of habit even though everything inside him trembled. "So," he said quietly, 3 years later and you still like black coffee?" She looked up, amused. "You remember that?" "I remember the things that matter." The way he said it, soft, almost accidental, made her glance down, cheeks faintly flushed. The rain outside began again, gentle and rhythmic. She looked around the diner. "It hasn't changed much." He chuckled. "And neither have I." I don't know about that, she said, studying him. You look steadier. Happier, maybe. He shrugged. It depends on the night, but I'm still here. Still trying to make soup and conversation taste better than they should. She smiled faintly. Still kind, then. Still surviving, he corrected. Kindness just makes it easier. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence. The air between them felt both familiar and strange, like a melody half remembered, but still capable of moving you. Finally, she spoke. I never thanked you properly that night. He laughed softly. You left me a note. I think that was thanks enough. Her eyes softened. You kept it? He hesitated, then reached into his wallet and unfolded it carefully. Edges yellowed, ink slightly blurred from time. I read it sometimes, when the world feels heavy. Reminds me that being good doesn't always need a reason. Her eyes shimmered. You have no idea how much that means to me. Evan leaned against the booth. So, tell me, Elle, what happened to you after that night? She smiled faintly. You remember the initial? How could I forget? It's the only name I had. She looked down at her coffee, swirling it slowly. When I came here that night, I was lost. I had just quit my job at a law firm, the kind that worships money and eats people's souls. I was drowning in debt, self-doubt, and noise. That night, I thought maybe I'd drive until I ran out of road, or courage. Evan's expression softened. And you ended up here? Because of the rain, she said quietly. It forced me to stop. And the soup, he teased gently. And the soup. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. I don't think you realize what that moment did. You didn't just pay for my meal. You gave me time to breathe, to think, to stop spiraling long enough to remember who I was. She paused. That night, after I left, I drove home. I didn't quit life. I went back to school, started something on my own. Evan's eyes widened. Something? She smiled shyly. A nonprofit. It's called Second Table. We fund meals for people who can't afford them. Not charity, but dignity. No questions, no judgment. Just a warm plate and a kind face. He stared at her, speechless. You built all that? She nodded. And it started here, with you. For a moment, Evan couldn't speak. He just looked at her. The woman who'd walked in, broken, and walked out, changed. And now, somehow, she was here again, bringing that kindness full circle. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. You're telling me one bowl of soup built a movement? Not the soup, she said softly. The person who served it. Something in his chest tightened, the kind of ache that isn't pain, but recognition. The diner door opened briefly, a gust of wind and rain sweeping in, but they barely noticed. She looked at him earnestly. I came back because I never forgot your face, Evan, and I thought it might be time to return what you gave me. He frowned slightly. You don't know me anything. I know. That's why it matters. She reached into her purse and slid a small card across the table. It had the logo of Second Table, a simple plate drawn in gold ink. Come visit sometime. We're opening our second branch downtown next month. Could use a good man with a heart for people, even part-time. Evan looked down at the card, then up at her. I don't know what to say. Say yes, or at least say you'd think about it. He nodded slowly, emotion rising in his chest. I'll think about it. She smiled, relief washing across her features. Good, because the world needs more waiters who pay for strangers' meals. They talked for another hour, about life, about the things they'd learned, about how sometimes one small moment becomes the hinge of everything that follows. When she finally stood to leave, the rain had stopped. The night was quiet, clean, peaceful. She turned at the door and met his eyes one last time. Good night, Evan, and thank you again for everything. He smiled. Good night, Elle. As the door closed behind her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of completion and beginning, because he knew somehow that wasn't the last time they'd meet. And this time, the story wasn't about paying for a meal. It was about what came after.
It had been a week since Lena, he finally knew her name, walked back into his life. But to Evan, it felt longer. Every shift at Louie's felt quieter now. Every time he poured coffee or wiped down a booth, he caught himself wondering what she was doing, where second table was, what kind of people she helped, and whether she ever thought about that rainy night the way he still did. The business card she'd left lay tucked in his wallet, right beside her old note from 3 years ago, the one that had survived laundry cycles, broken wallets, and time itself. He'd read it so often the paper had gone soft around the edges. "You reminded me there's still goodness in the world." It wasn't just a line anymore. It had become the quiet prayer he whispered to himself when life blurred. Sunday afternoon brought more rain. Soft, patient rain, the kind that doesn't rush you but asks you to listen. Evan stood outside a new building on 5th Street. The sign above the door read, "Second Table," in gold letters on a white background. The front windows were fogged from warmth inside, and through the glass he could see people. Some in aprons, some just sitting at long communal tables, laughing, eating, existing. No uniforms, no prices. Just humanity, plain and simple. He hesitated before pushing the door open. The smell of baked bread and tomato stew filled the air immediately. A woman in her 60s greeted him with a bright smile. "Welcome to Second Table. First time?" He nodded, taking it all in. "Yeah, I'm just visiting." "Well, then your family for the next hour." Her words disarmed him. He smiled faintly. "That's quite a slogan." "Not a slogan, dear," she said, eyes kind. "A promise." He wandered through the space slowly. Each wall was lined with handwritten notes, pinned in messy rows in every kind of handwriting imaginable. Curious, he stepped closer. Some were short. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not invisible. You didn't just feed me, you saw me." Others were stories, full paragraphs from strangers turned witnesses of kindness. He felt a lump rise in his throat, because in each of those words he heard echoes of that rainy night, the night that he had done the same thing without even realizing it. And then he saw it. Pinned near the center, framed in glass, a note written on diner receipt paper. The handwriting was neat, but slightly uneven. His handwriting. He froze. He remembered saying those exact words to her that night. And next to it, her handwriting, faded but steady. "You reminded me that kindness is never wasted." "Evan?" He turned. Lena stood a few feet behind him, smiling. She wore a simple sweater this time, hair loose around her shoulders. No pretense, no exhaustion, just calm. "I didn't think you'd come." "I wasn't sure I would. Didn't want to intrude." She shook her head gently. "You could never intrude here." He looked around again, still amazed. "You really built this? From nothing?" "Not from nothing," she said softly. "From gratitude." She led him toward one of the long tables where volunteers were serving stew. Each plate was placed with care, not charity. Evan noticed the difference instantly. "You ever wonder," Lena said quietly, "how many people walk through their hardest day without ever being seen?" He nodded slowly. "All the time. That's what this diner taught me. Everyone comes here carrying something invisible. That's exactly why I started this. I wanted to make a place where people could breathe again." He studied her for a long moment. "You found your purpose." She smiled gently. "Maybe, or maybe my purpose found me." They sat together as volunteers and guests flowed around them. A boy of about 12 sat across the table eating stew with his mother. Between bites, he looked up and whispered to her, "Mom, are these people rich?" His mother smiled, shaking her head. "No, sweetheart, they're kind." The boy nodded seriously, as if those two words were the same thing. Evan and Lena exchanged a glance that said everything. Later, as the guests began to leave and the room quieted, Lena poured them both coffee from a metal carafe. It wasn't fancy, no latte art or foam, just 2 cups of warmth in a world that could be cold. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Staying where you are. Louie's, the late nights, the small life?" He thought for a long time. "No." he said finally, because that's where people are. Every day, someone walks in just trying to survive, and if I can make their day 1% better, that's enough. Her eyes softened. That's why I came back. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? She set down her cup. You think I came here just to say thank you? Evan, you're the reason this place exists. The least I can do is ask you to be part of it. He froze. Part of it? She smiled. Help us. Mentor our volunteers. Be what you've always been. A reminder that kindness doesn't need a name tag. He didn't answer right away. He just looked around. At the laughter, the walls of gratitude, the lives intersecting in quiet harmony. A part of him still clung to Louise, to routine, to comfort, to the booth where you'd first met her. But another part of him, the part that had read her note every night for 3 years, knew that he'd already crossed the line between then and now. Finally, he smiled. I don't know if I deserve all this. She reached across the table and took his hand gently. You don't earn kindness, Evan. You pass it on. The rain had stopped outside. Golden light poured through the windows, catching the steam that rose from the last cups of coffee. And in that light, Evan Ross realized something he'd forgotten for a long time. That sometimes life doesn't give you grand second chances, it gives you small ones. A door quietly opening, a stranger remembering your name, a seat at a table where kindness is the only currency. He looked at Lena, and for the first time in years, his smile wasn't something he wore, it was something he felt.
Morning light spilled through the blinds of Evan's small apartment. It was the kind of light that invited change, soft but persistent. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the second table card lying beside his coffee. Next to it, the old note from Lena, the one written years ago in shaky ink, still carried the faint scent of diner coffee and rain. He turned it over again, tracing the faded words with his thumb. You reminded me that there's still goodness in the world. Evan smiled faintly. Guess it's my turn, he whispered. That afternoon, he walked back through the doors of Second Table, not as a visitor this time, but as something else entirely. The place buzzed with quiet rhythm. Volunteers arranged trays, wiped tables, and greeted every guest by name. There were no uniforms here, no separation between those serving and those being served. That was Lena's rule. No one here was less, no one here was more. She saw him as he walked in, and the look that crossed her face wasn't surprise. It was knowing, like she had already sensed his decision before he'd made it. Couldn't stay away, huh? She said, smiling. I shrugged. The soup was too good to forget. She laughed softly. Come on then, let me introduce you to the team. The first few days were a blur of movement. Evan learned names, stories, and routines. He served hot meals, washed dishes, listened, really listened, to people whose voices rarely found an audience. A veteran who'd lost his family but never his manners. A teenage girl who came every evening after school to help serve dinner, using her tip money from a part-time job to buy extra bread for strangers. A single mother who cried quietly when she realized no one was keeping score. Each story sank deeper into Evan's heart, reminding him that the smallest gestures often grow roots in the darkest soil. One evening, the sky broke open with rain again, the kind that carried both memory and music. The tables filled quickly as people sought shelter and warmth. Evan moved between them with practiced grace, his once tentative kindness now second nature. That's when he noticed her, a young woman sitting alone in the corner booth, head down, fingers trembling as she pushed food around her plate. Her clothes were damp. Her eyes were tired in a way he recognized immediately. He approached slowly, setting down a mug of coffee. Rain caught you, huh? He said gently. She looked up, startled. Her eyes were red, but her voice steady. Yeah, I guess it did. Coffee helps, he said. Or at least it pretends to. That earned a faint smile, the kind you get when smiling feels foreign. He sat them across from her. Rough night? She hesitated, then nodded. Lost my job, my wallet, my everything, really. A humorless laugh. You probably hear that a lot. Doesn't make it mean any less, Evan said softly. She blinked, unsure how to respond. When she finished her meal, she reached for her empty pockets and froze. I don't have any cash on me. I'm so sorry. I didn't. He stopped her with a raised hand. Don't worry about it, he said, echoing his own past words. This one's on the house. Her eyes widened. But, trust me, he said, smiling. Someone once did the same for me. As she looked at him, something shifted, the same fragile gratitude he'd seen in Lena's eyes years ago. Why would you do that? She whispered. Evan leaned back, meeting her gaze with quiet certainty. Because sometimes, he said, we just need someone to remind us we're still worth the kindness. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she couldn't speak. When she finally did, it was barely a whisper. Thank you. He nodded. Soup's best when it's shared with peace of mind. The words came out naturally, and only after saying them did he realize what he'd done. He'd become the reflection of the moment that once saved someone else. After she left, Lena walked over, watching her go. She'll be okay, she said softly. I think so, Evan replied. Lena studied him. You said the line again, didn't you? I laughed. Yeah, I guess I did. She smiled, a smile that held memory, pride, and affection all at once. You've come full circle, Evan. He looked out at the rain through the window, the same window where she once sat, the same rain that had brought her in. Funny, he murmured. I thought I was just a waiter. You were, until you became something more. Later that night, after everyone had left, Evan lingered by the wall of notes. Hundreds of handwritten messages now covered the space. New ones added every day. He pulled out a pen and found an empty corner. For the first time, he wrote something of his own. To whoever sits here. Next. The rain doesn't last forever. Neither does the hurt. But kindness, it stays. He pinned it to the wall, stepped back, and smiled. When he turned, Lena was standing by the door, watching quietly. You're staying, aren't you? She asked. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I finally am. That night, as he walked home through the drizzle, he realized something simple and profound. That life isn't about grand gestures or second chances written in bold letters. It's about quiet returns. About the people who walk back into your life carrying light. Because once, long ago, you offered them warmth in the dark.
Years passed quietly, the way good years often do. Not with noise, but with meaning. The world outside kept rushing, but inside the small heart of the city, Second Table had become something sacred. It wasn't just a place anymore, it was a story people told. A story about soup and rain and a man who once paid for a stranger's meal without realizing he was rewriting his own life. By the time autumn arrived again, the walls of Second Table were overflowing, every inch covered in handwritten notes, hundreds of lives, thousands of moments, stitched together by kindness. Some were new, some had yellowed at the corners. And in the middle, framed behind glass, still hung the two that started it all. Soup's best when it's shared with peace of mind. You reminded me that kindness is never wasted. Evan sometimes caught people reading them and smiling. They never knew they were reading his story, and that somehow made it even better. Lena stood by the window one quiet evening, watching the rain streak down the glass, the same kind of rain that had once driven her into a diner years ago. Her reflection stared back at her, older now, but softer around the edges. Evan approached carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Still black, no sugar. Old habits. Another full house tonight, he said, handing her a cup. She smiled faintly. They're not coming for the food anymore. No, he said softly. They're coming to remember they matter. They sat together on the long table, the lights dimmed, the last of the volunteers cleaning quietly in the background. Do you ever think, she began, how strange it is that everything that's happened, the foundation, these people, it all started with a $5 bowl of soup? Evan smiled. And a note. She laughed. And a note. Her laughter faded into a thoughtful pause. Do you still have it? He pulled out his wallet, worn and cracked at the edges, and unfolded the old paper. It was fragile now, like a memory you handled too often. I keep it close, he said. It reminds me that one moment of compassion can outlive everything else. A young woman approached just then, a volunteer named Mia. She was carrying a fresh stack of notes to add to the wall. Her smile was bright, the same kind of hope Evan had once seen in Lena's eyes years ago. Hey, you two, she said. There's something you should see. She led them to the far wall, the one they'd left mostly empty, saving it for something special. Pinned right in the center was a new note, fresh ink, delicate handwriting. To the man who paid for my dinner tonight, you don't know me, but you reminded me that kindness still exists. Maybe someday I'll get to tell you how much that meant. Lena smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Full circle," she whispered. Evan nodded slowly. "The rain keeps falling," he said softly, "but somehow it keeps washing the world clean." That night, as the last light faded and the city glowed under a curtain of rain, Evan locked up the diner and stepped outside. The air smelled like fresh bread and wet pavement, a scent that belonged to every new beginning. He tilted his head up, feeling the drizzle on his face. Behind him, the golden sign of second table flickered softly, a beacon in the dark, small but steady. Lena joined him, umbrella in hand. "Still hate umbrellas?" she teased. He grinned. "They just get in the way of the rain." She shook her head, smiling. "You're impossible." "And yet," he said, holding out his hand, "you're still here." She took it without hesitation, and together they stood in the rain, not as a savior and the saved, but as two souls who had learned that kindness doesn't end with one act. It ripples. It finds new hands, new hearts, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it finds its way back to you. Years later, when Evan's hair had turned silver and Second Table had grown into a citywide movement, reporters would ask him how it all began. He would always smile and say the same thing. With a bowl of soup and a stranger who came in from the rain. As the final drops of the storm disappeared into the quiet streets that night, Lena looked up at the glowing sign one more time and whispered, "Some rains never stop, they just learn where they belong." And beside him, Evan nodded, his eyes soft with peace. Because he knew now this wasn't just a story about kindness. It was a story about return, about the rain that stayed. Some acts of kindness end the moment they're given, but others keep walking beside us, quietly changing everything we touch. Because sometimes the meal you paid for years ago turns into someone else's chance to begin again, and the rain you once hid from becomes the place you finally learn to stand in. If this story found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Between Raindrop Stories. Here, every kindness has a consequence, and every ending carries a beginning you might not see yet. Tell us in the comments, do you believe one small act of kindness can change a life? Until next time, remember, some storms don't wash us away, they wash us clean.